Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you so much again for joining this inaugural MCPS FY 2025 operating budget Palooza. My name is Esther Wells, and I am the president of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League. And joining me as well in partnership is the Parents Coalition of Montgomery County, Maryland, and Montgomery County Civic Federation. So on behalf of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League and the leadership team, Joshua Montgomery is our vice president, and Gordy Brenny joining us in the audience is our treasurer. Please check us out on our website at www.mctaxpayersleague.org, or on Facebook, MCTL, Twitter at MoCo Taxpayers, or an email, presidentmctl@gmail.com. For our Parents Coalition of Montgomery County, Maryland, check them out at Facebook at www.facebook.com/PCMCMD, and on Twitter at PCMC1, or you can email them directly at parentscoalitionmc@outlook.com. Also, for the Montgomery County Civics Federation, their leadership team, Alan Bowser is here. He is their president. You can check them out on their website at www.montgomerycivic.org, or on Facebook, Montgomery County Civic Federation, Inc., or on Twitter at MCCivicFed, or contact them through email, info@montgomerycivic.org. So we do want to acknowledge everyone joining today. Thank you so much to our BOE candidates for this upcoming election, for joining us and accepting the call. We know you have a lot of things to do and a lot of places you could have been tonight, but you joined us this evening, and we greatly appreciate you for deciding to run and represent our children. And so we felt that this Budget Palooza would be a great opportunity to just bring you some awareness of the things that are happening in the budget, that should you be elected, that these are things you would have to vote on, and also just the perspectives of the associations and our view of the budget. So there are some ground rules. Sorry, I'm going to be multitasking here. So the ground rules are, we did our quick introductions. You can raise your virtual hand or put questions in the chat throughout our session. We will do Q&A after every chapter. There are 11 chapters. And as a reminder, the meeting will be recorded and available on our sponsor association's website and on social media platforms. The presenters will summarize what's in each chapter, discrepancies, hidden nuggets, questions we have, and most interesting points. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, because again, we have 11 chapters to cover. And so starting us off will be Gordy Brenny. He will be going over the superintendent's letter that is usually accompanied at the beginning of every FY operating budget. So with that, over to you, Gordy.
Thank you, Esther, and welcome to everyone. I want to start by saying that I'm an accountant, and I confess to being addicted to numbers. This is one of the worst MCPS budgets I've seen since the year 2000. That's the year that I got involved in the school system in a big way. Our oldest daughter attended Albert Einstein High School that year. I became vice president of the PTA. And I'm happy to say that that young lady is now 37 years old, and we refer to her as Dr. Phoebe. I want to get into some details, but I first want to make some summary comments. One thing that's been missing for 2 years in this summary that the superintendent provides in her letter is something we finally referred to as Table 1A. It was a one-page summary of all new spending. Can you imagine that, a one-page summary? And it's vitally useful, because it forced the preparers of the budget to really think about how they justified all that additional spending from the previous year. In 2021, Superintendent McKnight decided to drop that table and replace it with a rambling jumble of words. That's her letter. That is devoid of strategies, expected results, or costs. It's impossible to crosswalk this budget to strategies, and overhead activities are not highlighted in this budget. No surprise there. They constitute 45% of all spending. And that compares poorly to Fairfax County. They have 180,000 students. We have 160,000. Fairfax County has an overhead rate of 37%, significantly less. The state's maintenance of effort law, many of you are familiar with this, acts as a cost-plus contract and annually drives up overhead costs with little oversight by the school board. When parents say they want to fully fund MCPS, are they aware that almost half of the money is for non-instruction? A bloated school budget, and in particular, the support and well-being activities, which we're going to get to in a second, that's chapter 2, it's 517 positions. This includes many of the associate superintendents who got caught up in the Beidelman promotion fiasco, and it's probably a good place to start for eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse. Many of these positions, if eliminated, could be reorganized down to the school level and provide funding for adding a new assistant principal in each of our high-need schools to implement school improvement plans that would reduce the achievement gap. Further, a dedicated Office of Inspector General reporting to the school board could be established to strengthen the governance process in accordance with U.S. standards for all government and commercial organizations, and would further improve efficiency and effectiveness. Finally, and this is something that the Taxpayers League has advocated for forever, charter school applications should be reviewed for cost-effective ways to reduce the achievement gap in chronically failing schools. Not rejected as the board did last summer based on the quality of proposed school building. Okay, those are my summary comments. I'll give you some high-level stats, and then we'll move on. The first high-level stat I'd like to refer to is this is a budget that constitutes a 5% increase over last year. And you'll see that in table 1. 90% of the spending is for compensation costs. So when we talk about FTEs or full-time equivalents, that's where the game is being played in terms of resource allocation. A highlight in every budget every year has been the maintenance of effort spending. That is how much more money is being spent than the maintenance of effort level for local funding contributions. It's not cited for the first time in 20 plus years in this budget, perhaps because they're embarrassed. I guesstimate it back of the envelope at 182 million. We know that free and reduced meals, that's farms kids that are, those are the poor kids in our school system, are about 44% of our students now. And they need more interventions and more tutoring to improve their academic proficiency in math and reading. That would justify spending above the maintenance of effort level, but all that spending is in the base of the budget. There is no reference to it in the superintendent's letter under accelerators. I'm going to turn quickly to this table shows that local revenues are a significant portion. That is county property taxes and income taxes are a very significant portion of the budget. And the increase in that spending is almost entirely falling on you all, that is county taxpayers, 8.3%. The next slide, if you will, Esther. Yes. So there is increased spending. A couple of highlights. You see increased spending for salaries and benefits and healthcare. We're going to talk about this some more later, but a big slice of that is healthcare costs. Over $700 million a year, and we're self-insured on that. This is a plan that was characterized as a quote-unquote Cadillac plan when Obama healthcare legislation was being reviewed, but it somehow managed to survive, and now it's largely out of control. We need to have a fresh look at how we control healthcare costs, both for current employees and for retirees. You'll see some other adjustments, but I want to take you to the second to last line called ESSER. That's Every Student Succeeds money that was introduced during the COVID era, and it goes away in September. That was, we were able to fund, one-time fund a lot of positions, psychologists, sociologists, et cetera, in the budget, but we can no longer afford much of that. And the school system is proposing retaining about 30 million of that by moving it into the base of the county system budget. For accelerators, you see a very small number, and every nickel of that is county overhead. Shamefully, none of it has anything to do with reducing the achievement gap. Okay, Esther, what else have we got?
Yes, so this is one of the most important slides of the night. Do you
Right.
want to start with this
The
one,
school
Gordon?
board is meeting concurrent with us. They announced their date after us. Coincidence? And they're talking about 3 programs. You see them highlighted: the Virtual Academy, Innovative Calendar Schools, and the Leadership Program that could be cut. It's small beer when you look at a $3.3 billion budget. But you'll find that there'll be a lot of advocates tonight at the school board talking about how this is their favorite program. You won't. Most people that have a problem trying to justify this spending in terms of how it links to increasing proficiency in math and reading won't be at that presentation tonight in the school board. They're here with us tonight. You'll also see on the below that there's some adjustment to the budget being made. And some of this adjustment was just made within the last month, since the state announced it was going to give the county more money to the tune of about $29 million, I believe.
35, and we've already accounted for 10. So a net increase of 28.
Thank you, Esther. And one of those big items is the Employee Health Benefit Fund. This, again, are healthcare costs that for current employees that are largely out of control. And we need to take a look at that entire self-insurance plan and see whether or not it disciplines costs as effectively as need be. Next slide, Esther.
And so with that, sorry, 2 things I wanted to add in here, as Gordy mentioned, of the additional funds that came in from the state before the board can adopt the budget on Thursday, I believe is the tentative date. A revised budget will come forward, and potentially some of these items will impact that budget. And so, with MCPS, some of the things that they are recommending or potentially recommending is, like we said, the $20 million increase to this health benefit fund that sounds like it needs that money. So I can understand there. The overall revenue increase, I believe they're looking to add on new expenditures for this new funds that they got from the state. And then that leaves potentially a reduction to local revenues, right? Our taxpayer dollars potentially will go down by 3.5 million because we are being asked to increase our giving this year by 8%. So some reduction would be great to keep the budget relatively consistent. And then the 2 wild cards that potentially can happen is one with the BOE members. I believe last year the board requested an increase in the superintendent's budget for priorities that they believe needed to be included. So potentially again this year, they will make some recommendations. The one that I think that would be important for the board members to suggest is the outcomes from the OIG report and the discussion they recently had with the county council about how they're going to implement the recommendations in this FY2025 budget. The HR group, we did see some increase to the amount of investigators in the Division of Investigation, but understanding truly how they got to that number and ensuring that they are set up to be able to implement these changes that are being recommended, I think would be important for making modifications. So I would anticipate those changes coming forward. And from a superintendent perspective, right, we have a new interim superintendent. This is her one shot to kind of put her stamp on it as her end date is tentatively at the end of the school year, end of June. And so potentially there, the superintendent may make some changes to just kind of personalize it now that she's the one that is in charge. So potentially.
Do we have any questions at this point?
Sorry, we're going to try to hold ourselves at 5 minutes to, overview and 5 minutes discussion. So definitely put your questions in the chat. I don't know, Paula, do you see any questions in the chat so far? You'd like to take over for a few minutes?
Sure. I don't see anybody, but please put your questions in the chat. I actually had one for Gordy. Can you define what an accelerator is? Because I saw that in my chapters that I was reviewing also.
Yes, accelerators are strategies and tactics that will reduce the achievement gap, improve reading and math proficiency. And this has been a customary title that MCPS has used in its budget for the last 10 years since they started doing strategic planning. That is quite a statement that I just made. They didn't do strategic planning prior to 10 years ago. And accelerators that are popular today are interventions, where you work with kids, teachers work one-on-one or in small groups with kids before, during, or after school, and tutoring, which is done through a third party and managed by the teacher in the subject matter.
Thanks. I also had a comment when I was starting to research. We had done budget paloozas in the 20-teens, and I looked at the budget in 2014, which is 10 years ago, and it was about $1 billion less than it is now. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
I have a similar comment, Paula. I went back to 2018. The budget has gone up by $800 million since 2018. That's a 33% increase. And the enrollment that's forecasted for 2025 is within literally 30 students, just 30. So almost exactly the same as 2018. So we're servicing the same size population of students with a massively increased budget. The number
Right.
of employees, FTEs, has increased substantially over this period. If you go back to 2018, it's increased by about 11%. Teachers and support staff are the big driver of that. But if you pull out teachers and support staff and focus on administrative roles and business support roles, there's been a 30% increase. So the size of the central office has completely ballooned, and that has driven a lot of the increase in the budget.
Right. I mentioned in my summary the offices and activities of student well-being and support. That has been where the reorganization and new positions have been added to Carver. They're there primarily to lower the achievement gap and improve math and reading proficiency, but they don't appear to be justified since they have not moved the needle.
And maybe two things as I've been following along with the board meetings that has been presented to us is that one, inflation. I think there's a slide that MCPS has presented that showed this right now our budget is on like a nominal level versus when you look at the real costs to students that has been flat or maybe downward a little bit. So that's one of the explanations that MCPS has provided. And then also working closely with the Associate Superintendent of Special Education. One of the things that she has also highlighted to the board is that the new students that are being enrolled, and we see this in the chart for special education, that is the only group of students that are increasing this year, even though the overall is decreasing. And so MCPS is stating that the needs of students each year is greater. And so that is also contributing to the need for an increased budget for potentially the same level of students. The needs are higher per student. But that's great discussion. Totally agree that we should keep an eye on that. So with that, we will go to the next slide. I believe, Gordy, you have touched on everything, and we just did our discussion. So that was awesome. So with that, and again, remember to either use your virtual hand function if you'd like to discuss or submit your questions in the chat. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Kara, to kick us off on Chapter 1, Schools.
Actually, sorry, could I interrupt? I see that Svetlana has her hand up.
Thank you.
Do you want to have a
Yeah,
comment?
thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to quick follow up on the item that we just discussed. So it sounds like from the summary and the comments the MCPS offered in terms of why they're increasing these budgets, it sounds like they're failing and yet they're asking for more money. And as they ask for more money, they continue to fail our students. Is there an accountability in that
No.
respect, or this is just going to be ongoing?
That excellent question. And implied in that question is how should we hold MCPS accountable? The Taxpayers League has advocated for years that the primary test should be how well the school system does at reducing the achievement gap. And they measure that by improved proficiency in math and reading, which have fallen into a chasm in the last couple of years and is still well below where it was pre-COVID. The school system doesn't want to be held accountable for performance. The school system measures both teacher and principal effectiveness based on factors other than student performance. The budget provides no data on how any of the programs are going to improve performance. That's where it has to start, a strategic mindset.
Okay, I see 2 participants' hands raised in the chat, Paula.
Right, Brenda Diaz?
Yeah, I have a question. So I know that, so in the thinking about like accountability, holding them accountable based on reading and math proficiency, this would be looking at teacher performance then. I was wondering, do we know how many teachers have gone through a process of, I forget what that's called, but when they have to, like, they've been called out, they've been evaluated, they've been examined by the administrators, then they go through a process with the union, and they're assigned a counselor or a teacher to help them improve their performance. There's a name for that. Do we know of any, like, does the budget talk about that expense, that particular office?
So it does, and this is just drawing on the fact that I've watched all 3 work sessions at the BOE multiple times, and I think some of the increase in one of the budget, it alludes to that. It says there's a need for more central office staff to coach either the newer teachers or the teachers that are underperforming. And definitely, please, if anyone that is closer to the numbers has any.
But there hasn't been like a dedicated effort beforehand.
Okay, I couldn't confirm or deny, but potentially, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just asking. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, so as a community, we are raising these issues and we are discussing them, and we can always take that to MCPS to get clarification or answers. But yes, it's a good point that you raised, that if that's important to us as taxpayers, we should elevate that.
Okay, and I think we've got Nazim and then Eric. Oop.
Yes, thank you very much, Paula. My question, I'd like to piggyback off Svetlana's question. It's just our local middle school has recently went through a test, like a map test, and we found ourselves at a very low results. It's only like 70% of our students are reported to be proficient in math, which and it's actually it's been a down the hill trend for the past years. And even if we factor COVID here, we still find it really surprising, especially as the budget grows and expenses grows, that we understand. So therefore, like, really, like, okay, we're spending more money, and however, we do not really see that being reflected in the results, test results for children. And my second question that I texted is, what are the comparative stats? Let's say Montgomery County is a relatively affluent county compared to across the nation. So I don't want to compare us with Prince George's, Prince William's, but let us compare ourselves with Fairfax and Loudoun County. What are the stats there? How much are they spending and what are their rates? Test rates, I mean. Thank you.
Thanks. And then Eric? You're on mute. Let's give him a minute. Or Eric's dog.
There we go. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Just real quick, because I have to sort of catch up on a lot of this stuff, but when we're talking about the maintenance of effort rules, right, you can't just sort of like cut backwards. Like there's this like requirement to basically this plus. So obviously that would be a driver of the increases, right? If you can't sort of hold something level and you are sort of compelled to sort of move up. This is sort of like a larger theoretical question, but are we looking at sort of a ballooning budget because of that rule? But literally the county leadership, the doesn't, they have to make the money, they have to show the money, right? They have to show effort, right?
Right. No, you're right on, and I think that's definitely part of the balance that has to occur. And so either the way that maintenance of effort is computed needs to change at the state level. I know some of the comments that have come out of MCPS leadership is that the MOE doesn't account for inflation, which is rampant right now, and so that needs to, be accounted for. And so it definitely seems like it's something that needs to be revisited. But to your point, I believe it always has to increase from wherever we set the baseline. And so we do need to be careful and intentional that whenever we go above MOE, that incremental investment by taxpayers should be able to upfront have some targets and metrics of what success will mean that would justify the investment, the additional investment that the community is making in our students. So
Yeah, I mean, that gets at my point. When we critique the budget, and we sort of thinking about sort of a lack of bureaucratic imagination. I mean, they've got to show something.
Right.
And they're doing it. They just don't have performance metrics or useful things in the budget that tells us or anybody that it's working.
Right.
But
And
that's a different kind of like budgetary criticism, which really is a state issue more than the county, although the county's just not dealing with it very well.
right. I think all stakeholders, all elected officials have a role to play. And so I think it is important, exactly to your point, that we highlight these things. Later on in our PowerPoint presentation, we do have that as one of the recommendations. So you're definitely on track. And so maybe with that, we will go to chapter 1. So we're a lot behind, but that's okay. This is great discussion. So we'll keep it going so that, again, we can have these points elevated to the right levels as we continue our budget making. So with that, I will turn it over to Kara to get us started on schools, chapter 1.
Thank you, Esther. Similar to Gordy, I'm also an accountant, so very comfortable with numbers and have enjoyed going through the budget. And thank you for setting up this forum. I just have one slide on chapter 1, and then I also was looking at chapter 2 too. So hopefully I can help us catch up on time. So chapter 1 is schools. And this chapter alone represents 53% of the total budget. So this schools portion of the budget is $1.8 billion. And the increase is 4.1% or $70 million. You'll recall from Gordy's slides, overall, the total budget is going up by 5%. So this area is going up less than what you see in the total. Elementary, middle, and high school, kind of the traditional schooling areas, they're going up by about 3%. So again, they're not the drivers of the increase. And there is a decent amount of the funding that sits within those 3 areas. Where we really see large increases as you go down the list there, Esther, thanks for doing that. Head Start is increasing by about 12%. Title I schools by about 6%, alternative education 6%. The Montgomery Virtual Academy is increasing by $1 million and 30%. And that, as was noted earlier, is one of the items that's being reviewed at the Board of Education special session that's happening this evening. Funding for English learners is increasing by $7 million or 8%. If we look at the population demographics of MCPS, we see that over the years, the Hispanic population has increased substantially. So there's a lot more. That's just one example of the non-English speaking population that we see growing, but we know that Montgomery County is diversifying significantly, which is creating a big challenge for the school district to be able to address the needs of non-English speakers. And we see that increase there. And we also see special ed increasing by 7% and $20 million. So the biggest drivers there we see are that are beyond the 3% that we saw in the baseline. We see the increase in MVA, English learners, and special ed. So that breaks it down by the different components of the school budget. If we go to the other side of the slide, these are the explanations that MCPS has provided for what is the underlying driver of the increase. So again, total increase of $70 million. About $53 million is coming from just the continuing salary needs of the baseline population based on the contracts that are in place. They are forecasting enrollment decrease in elementary, middle, and high school, which is creating savings of $11.6 million. They are forecasting enrollment increase in special ed and English learners, which is costing $10 million. They've taken reductions in materials. I also see some overlap when I read the details behind the efficiencies that they talk about. Materials often comes up. There's a curriculum materials, textbooks, etc. They're taking reductions there. Now on to one of the biggest drivers of the increase, as Gordy mentioned, within the school section of the budget, there's a $14 million increase related to ESSER funding going away. So that now has to be funded out of the operating budget. They are increasing funding for instruments and instruments repair. That's something that's called out in the superintendent's letter. That's about $1.5 million. They're also increasing mostly preschool and pre-K funding. So that's covered under the blueprint for Maryland and the mandates that the state has set for education in those pre-kindergarten levels. And that is costing $2.9 million. There's some changes in IDEA grants and other changes of about $2 million. So those are the big drivers of the $70 million increase. So 76% of that increase is coming from salaries, 14% from growing programs, 20% from ESSER information, expiration, offset by some enrollment decreases. I see some of the questions in the chat. Instruments is literally musical instruments. That is to fund our music programs at the various schools.
And to add to that, Kara, so I think the instruments this year, that's one of the few accelerators that we saw, that it is for the repair of the instruments. I believe it's at the Title I schools where either instruments need to be repaired or replaced there. So that literally is instruments for the band.
Yeah.
And then for the ESSER funds, I believe some of it were for expenditures that were moved onto ESSER, then are now being moved back. And then some of it were originally on ESSER and now are being moved onto the base budget. Yes.
Yeah. And there's another question in there around blueprint. I'm not an expert on blueprint, so anyone else can jump in if they would like to. But the state has set out an outline of how we can invest in students earlier in their educational career, so ages 3 and 4. And they have built what they call a blueprint for education, which requires expansion of programs in public schools for children of the preschool and pre-K age. And that is what the blueprint investment supports.
So Svetlana, I saw you had your hand up, and I'm not sure if that was addressed and you didn't lower your hand, or you have another question?
Yeah, just the blueprints question that was part of that caught my interest was $9 million, and the slide previous to that is about $3 million in the schools. The one before this was showing a total blueprint budget of about $9 million. So where can we get more information on how those funds are actually allocated? Yeah, that slide right there, blueprint materials.
Yeah, I can address that. This is Gordy. So most of it is for pre-K, pre-kindergarten teachers. And the addition of 100 FTEs is almost entirely pre-K. You may be familiar, Svetlana, with the county's strategy, which is to rely heavily on MCPS to provide pre-K schooling and very little reliance on third-party providers. Those teachers are located in central locations by and large, which is convenient for MCPS, but not very convenient for parents. And the enrollment in pre-K has been over projected every year for the last 4 years. It remains to be seen if we can keep these teachers busy.
Right. And one thing I'd like to add, our county executive, one of the things that he's mentioned, and as we know, that once the budget leaves the BOE, it's going to the county executive, is that with the blueprint mandates and the increase in the Head Start enrollment in our schools, that it will be hard for private daycare centers to compete and remain open, since really that's the bread and butter of the daycare centers, where, you know, if now their daycare centers can no longer have those 3- and 4-year-olds and all they have are the newborns and the 1-year-olds, where the ratios are mandated at such low levels that it'll be hard to be profitable. That's one of the concerns with the blueprint and ensuring that our private partners like daycare centers can continue to thrive. I see 2 hands raised, Paula.
Yeah, Carol, I think Svetlana, she just asked her question, and then Caroline Friedman. You have to unmute, Caroline.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that I am here because I am a representative of a private daycare center. We have over 100 children, and we share a space with another private daycare center that has over 125 children. And I'm here because I'm trying to understand some of the budget, because the actual facility that we're using is a leased facility from the county, and it's MCPS is looking at taking it back so that we would be forced to close or move, which would be challenging.
Right.
So I'm just wanted to point out that I'm sure, and they said it's for the blueprint, which is very funny, of course, because we're over 250 childcare slots between our 2 programs. So I think the other piece that relates to this as the blueprint in Maryland outside of MCPS is the amount of money that the government is putting into the Child Care Scholarship Program and the Working Parents Association in Montgomery County, which is underutilized. I just had someone from that office speak to me that they're funded by a grant and they can't spend their money because people don't know about it and different things. So I just wanted to give that perspective that I'm trying to learn as much as I can about the budgeting process to understand what MCPS is thinking, to try to figure out how our center can navigate the uncertainty, because it's very hard to take students for the next school year if you don't know what building you're going to be in. So we're all just in this moment of uncertainty. So I appreciate this information. I just wanted to share that insight about the blueprint, whatever I know.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you for that. Absolutely.
And I just, I see Jonathan, I don't know if your question got answered, but you put in the chat, are all 3 parts of ESSER funding still available through September 2024? I don't know if anyone on this call knows the answer to that.
I think MCPS has spent most, and they're just left with the ESSER 3, and that ends September 2024. So this budget is the first one where there is no ESSER funds are gone. FY2025, there are no ESSER funds available. It's all been spent.
Thanks.
And I think there's a website online that you can see how every school system in Maryland spent their ESSER funds. Okay, so we will turn it back over to Kara for Chapter 2, School Support and Well-Being.
Thank you, Esther. School support and well-being is not just well-being programs. It really is a lot of the administration that sits on top of the schools. So the school principals report into associate superintendents, and those roles all sit within this budget. So when you see this title, I think it can be a little bit misleading. It's not just about well-being. It really is about school support and the administration that sits on top of the schools. So this portion of the budget is a $65 million component of the budget. So it's about 20% of the total budget. And it is going up by $14 million or 28%. And the biggest driver there is $10 million, which again is a transfer of ESSER, items that were previously funded by ESSER moving into operating. And there's a $5 million increase in continuing salary. There are some new FTEs, not a substantial amount. a few realignments and some work to drive efficiencies. So I'll go to the notes at the bottom. A lot of the supports that were added during the pandemic related to mental health supports were previously funded through ESSER, but now those need to be funded through the operating budget. So you see $4.5 million for 20 school psychologists, 19 community coordinators, and about $700K for contractors and part-time salaries. There's 1.6 million for programs that support mental health and telehealth. And there's $3.2 million for 32 social workers and the supervisor. And the incremental FTEs that are noted above are for 6 restorative justice specialists. So in this part of the budget, again, the big driver is the fact that funding for many of these programs, which were new since the pandemic and were funded through ESSER, now need to be funded out of the operating budget.
Sorry, one of the things I wanted to highlight here that recently at a board, at the Fiscal Management Committee, that one of the board members mentioned that really resonate with me is that MCPS has over time become a microcosm of Montgomery County. And what I mean by that is Montgomery County Public Schools, their main function is to educate our children, but over time, due to needs of students, they have taken on everything, right? They've taken on mental health of our students, they've taken on the food insecurity, they've taken on the psychologist, the social worker, they've taken on transportation, and it's like, that is not your primary function. And I think that's part of why I feel like MCPS kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. And I'd really like to see MCPS refocus because of the level of performance that we're seeing in our students, that they need to be refocused on education and really have partnerships with the state and county level to take on a lot of these things that are essentially redundancies, right? Like, why does Montgomery County need 2 Department of Transportation? When you look at the recent inclement weather, you had plowing happening faster on one side versus MCPS. And so people are like, well, what's going on here? Or like food insecurity or these social programs. The redundancies, I think, are creating inefficiencies for taxpayers in terms of funding that I'd really like to see some work in eliminating the redundancies and shedding MCPS of all of these other things that are outside of education. I see a hand raised, Paula.
Right, Svetlana, do you have another question, or is that you did it?
I do.
Okay, great. Good.
I can't agree more with what has just been mentioned. And I think, to follow up on that, I had a question when we were talking about the blueprints, when what makes us think that when MCPS is failing our children, K through 12, now we're going to trust them with providing more education to the younger children when they cannot even handle the K through 12. So that's one question. So that's, in my mind, that program has to be a non-starter until the MCPS is able to prove they can handle what they have on their plate currently. Mm-hmm. And then number 2, the other question that I would have is, I'm curious because this one doesn't have the percentage increases on the staff salary levels, but the slide where we were talking about the schools, I made a quick calculation. I believe it was a 22% increase for salaries. What does this salary increase represent in this category?
Yeah, so great questions. I'll start with the second one first. The increases are based on a 2-year contract that MCPS entered into with the unions. So they're just honoring the contracts that they entered into. So all else being equal, the salaries are increasing because they promised that to increase the salaries. That's also compounded with the fact that the blueprint for Maryland education requires that starting salaries, I believe, are $60,000 for teachers, and then goes up from there. But in Maryland, right, when you look at the cost of living in Montgomery County versus elsewhere. If everyone has to start at 60,000, teachers aren't going to come to Montgomery County for 60,000. So that would have to be more of a floor than a ceiling for Montgomery County. So I think those are two things that are driving the increase in the salaries for teachers in MCPS, with all else being equal. It's the blueprint and it's the contract that MCPS entered into with the unions. And then your first question, I think with the Maryland Blueprint for Education, just some of the things that Governor Westmore talked about while he was campaigning was that, you know, for young children, he said the majority of their mind is developed like 80% by the time they're age 4, right? But I think it's with low-income families, a lot of times these children are not in a certified licensed daycare center. And so when they come into MCPS at age 5 or 4, depending on the cutoff, they're not used to just being in school and structure and routine or having that baseline education. And so I think the Maryland Blueprint is trying to right size that from an equity perspective to ensure that the youngest children have access to early high quality education, because they wouldn't then have to spend the rest of their academic years, K through 12, catching up, right? So if you catch them early, then you prevent the academic achievement gap from even starting, because they got quality early education. So I think that's the plan. And I think high level, I agree. But I think the part of the sentiment is Maryland is not being an equal partner in creating these unfunded mandates. Like they're not contributing enough to the local school systems that gives relief to local taxpayers like us. So we're having to foot the bill that the state said they want local school systems to do, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're going to make these mandates, then send the money.
Well, and the other part, and the other part of that is, you know, I don't think the taxpayers would disagree funding these additional programs to bridge the gap. I think the problem is knowing that they're failing. And so why are we funding the programs that are failing? Because, you know, in my mind, there's other ways to achieve that, you know, where you could potentially help out the struggling families that are maybe not able to afford high quality daycares, you know, help them out with directing those funds to the business owners that are actually, you know, that are you know, leading an effort in these smaller, better quality, more attention focused daycares. And I think that's a better spend of money compared to knowing that we have, you know, 30% proficiency level in K through 12. And now we're gonna, like, we are gonna say that we're gonna improve this. I mean, I just don't see how this is, you know, it makes no sense. I mean, this is it's just a waste of money and resources.
So I definitely hear you. Two things. One, I think the amount of pre-K and Head Start positions that are needed, MCPS is my understanding they don't have enough. And so we do need the partnerships of like the faith-based organizations and other private institutions to take on some of these enrollments, I believe is my understanding. But then I think too, that's where, you know, associations like ours, the Montgomery County Taxpayers League and the Civic Fed and PCMC, that's where we come in, where we need to hold our elected officials that we have put in place, our board members, to represent us, to make them aware of our needs, right? Like if we don't believe that MCPS and the superintendent and her team are adequately educating our children, then we need to engage with our elected officials to make them aware that, hey, this is some of the things we're seeing. It's not meeting our expectations. We need you to put the press or to, you know, provide more oversight and accountability and transparency. So I think that's how we got to having this budget palooza, is to get more community members aware. That's the first step, of just awareness, and then advocacy. And so you're exactly right. And I do think it's beyond time that we re-engage with MCPS and try to be part of the solution, not just have outrage, but to say, here's what we've identified. Here are some potential solutions that we think would work. Please now take the torch and, you know, enforce it with the superintendent as your only employee.
Okay, and Joan Fiddler had a question. Can I assume that FTE costs shown do not include health and retirement benefits and thus do not represent the true costs associated with each new FTE? And I don't know, Kara, do you want to take that on?
Yeah, that's true. I'm not sure who's covering one of the later chapters that includes all those costs.
That's
and
right.
so if you do actually read the budget, they will call out, you know, 6 FTEs for restorative justice. The cost of the FTEs included in this chapter is 700,000, and the cost of the cost related to retirement and healthcare, which is included in another chapter, is X. So they're very transparent about that if you take the time to read through the full budget. But you're right, it is in 2 different places.
Right, and I think that state mandate, I referenced that in one of the later chapters that I believe I'm covering, or someone's covering, is COMAR requires that, I think it's chapter 10, that you have to put it all centrally self-contained there. Okay, so maybe with that, then we will move on to chapter 3. Great discussion and engagement. Thank you, everyone. So for chapter 3, I'll turn it over to you, Paula.
Okay, I actually, before I start, Sheldon Fishman had this comment, I guess. The blueprint includes accountability. What is in the MCPS budget to comply with any new accountability requirements? Esther, Gordy, or Kara, do you?
Yeah, this is Gordy. I'd like to jump on that one.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay,
We have a huge finance and budget department, which is responsible for reporting and accountability, and they do not produce reports that hold the system accountable. They're scorekeepers. We have a BOE Board of Education representative, Lynn Harris, who's in charge of the committee for fiscal operations, and we've met with Lynn. She would like to improve the reporting by the school system to make them more accountable, and has asked for our suggestions. This is something that we dearly do want to see. And I think when we talk about accountability, that word gets tossed around a great deal.
Right.
As an accountant, it's a term of art for me. Accountability means, how did you do against what you promised to do?
Right.
And I leave it at that.
okay. And I
Thank you for the
guess-
question.
Yes.
So I'll jump in. I don't know how we're doing on time, but chapter 3 is academics, the Office of the Chief Academic Officer. And it's a very small chapter with a budget, but I'll start with each of these chapters starts with a racial equity and social justice statement. So I was going to go through that first. The purpose of the office in this racial equity and social justice statement. The office oversees the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs and the Office of Special Ed, so that, quote, all students have access to a high quality first instruction that is anti-racist and reflects cultural diversity, unquote. And the statement does mention team accountability to monitor performance data for specific focus groups and to provide differentiated professional learning, school-based curriculum support, and resources. And one thing I noticed in going through the budget and the chapters that I looked at, there were a lot of references to data. Everywhere you look, they're collecting a lot of data. So of course the question is, where are the data? How can the parents, get hold of these data? So also, it said that these 2 offices are to operationalize clear expectations for, quote, wellness, teaching, and hearing for capacity around a list of strategies. These include engage in data analysis. So this small office does a lot of data. They'll be using formative and summative measurements. So, something to go after is, where are all the data that they're collecting? I'll just go through. There are 4 full-time positions, and that's the same as in the FY24 budget, so that did not change. There are 2 professional. There's a chief academic officer and an executive director, and to support those 2 people, there are 3 admin staff, copy editor / admin secretary, and 2 admin services managers. And there's also a line item for part-time positions, but it's unclear how many staff are included in this. I always look at travel. For some reason, this office of 5 people the budget includes $9,000 for travel and $5,000 for supplies. It doesn't look like there are any consultants listed. And there are 3 main functions for this office that are listed in this budget: strategic planning and continuous improvement. And they'll work with different admin offices. And there'll be a newly launched Pathway to Success that they align work across all the different central offices. So my impression is this office, which is spending, over $500,000, is an admin organization office at Carver that does admin for other admin offices. So it would be nice if the Board of Ed looked at this particular office. So there is also that teaching and learning oversight. They lead and direct instructional priorities, but as we know, there are already many, many staff members that do work on instructional material and assessments. So, the last thing was student and family support oversight. So it's a small office, but it's really seems to kind of repeat what many other offices at Carver do. And there you have it.
Awesome.
Brenda, you have a question. You're on mute.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned that this office does a lot of data analysis and they use formative and summative assessments to collect their data. That's where they're getting their data. So they're looking at student performance. That's what that is, right?
Formative and summative measurements.
Yeah, so they're looking at student performance, but are they looking at student performance based on race, based on class, based on ethnicity? Like so
that's really not called out in this budget summary at all. I mean, that's what I say is when you read through these chapters, so many references to data collection and analysis are in these chapters. And I have no idea, or many of us don't know where these data are or how they're being analyzed.
Okay.
So sorry, I can't say more, but
No, that's fine.
That's good feedback for anyone that watches the replay, is to take that back to the board, that the community members need more transparency when it comes to understanding the purpose of this line item in the budget.
And then Svetlana has a question.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know if the social justice positions, why are those separated out, and what is their function? Does it somehow that to me is such a weird designation. So we're spending 700,000 plus for 6 positions of social justice.
No, that's a statement that is woven through the budget and is at the beginning of each chapter. And that is a big focus of the school system now, is to
restorative justice. I'm sorry, it's restorative justice.
Oh, no, I apologize. It's not restorative justice is not this. This is just equity throughout the school system to try to right size the school system. And
so we have 700, and I thought that it had to do something with this line item as well, because this line item seems to be very similar to that one. So wouldn't it go into the same bucket? Now we're all of a sudden doubling this bucket of who knows what this is actually designated for?
Which, this office, you mean? Or
yeah, this office, the mission of this office seems to be redundant with the new positions for restorative justice.
No.
So no, it's not. Could we get a clear, a little more understanding of what the two, what are the two differences between the two, I guess?
So MCPS engaged in an anti-racist audit maybe a year or two ago, and they're currently in the phase of the action plan. And as part of that, every chapter in the FY2025 operating budget begins with a racial equity and social justice statement that basically highlights the concerns and outcomes and actions that are stipulated in the anti-racist audit plan. the restorative justice positions, those are either like specialists or coaches or teachers that are getting a stipend, where it can take many forms, but sometimes what has been highlighted is when a student has committed a wrong or said something offensive or behaved inappropriately with another student. A restorative justice coach does that. They restore relationships and they coach students through maybe their part in the role that they played in creating this harm to another student. So restorative justice is separate to racial equity and social justice action plan. They're two separate things, but restorative justice happens at our schools, and it can be done either by a specialist or a coach or a teacher in helping our students, have healthy relationships and interactions with each other. And whenever those things are harmed, they have conversations and outcomes and plans with them to prevent it from happening again.
And how about the counselors? What's the role of counselors then? That sounds redundant now to the counselor program.
Right. I think with the counselors, what they've seen is the ratio of counselor to student is inadequate. And so I think restorative justice coaches have been supplemental to that to help definitely in the schools where maybe a lot of these incidents are occurring, to provide more manpower to the schools. And so as part of the appendices, I definitely encourage you to take a look there, where MCPS shows how they determine staffing levels at each position and how certain schools receive certain allocations of counselors and other, security personnel, things like that, based on, a few different things.
And I think we need to move on because it's almost 8 o'clock and we're just in chapter 4.
Yes,
Sorry. I hope I got
definitely,
everybody in.
yes, we can keep the conversation going afterwards offline. Please do continue to engage. These are great questions. So with that, we will move into chapter 4, and that's me. Okay, so curriculum and instructional programs. And so curriculum and instructional programs, for the base budget, it represents a little over $89.5 million, or 2.7% of the budget. Here you could see the breakdown of each one. I've highlighted for your convenience the ones that I wanted to call out or bring your attention to. So of the $89.5 million, it's mainly between these three categories here: the salaries and wages, call out 420 positions, and you could see here 50% early childhood and Title I services. For other call out, I don't like when they use the level other and it's in millions. It's like, break that down. And so during the budget sessions, MCPS did a better job of providing more color around that. So here it's primarily the employee benefits from Title I grants and enterprise funds. And then for the contractual services of $11.3 million, that is mainly the blueprint requirement, career, post-secondary partnership. So this is one of the pillars where, example, WorkSource Montgomery receives $7 million out of this to, again, ensure our students are career, college, and community ready. Other notes I have on this item, let me go there. The curriculum, so this also includes the curriculum department, right? And so there, the curriculum is either purchased, it's written, and or a combination of the two based on budget and other factors. There's a variety of sources utilized to derive curriculum. I'm not so much a fan of, kind of putting together curriculum in a way that potentially would not have there be consistency throughout the entire district. I'm not an educator, and so I won't say too much on it, but just at face value as an outsider looking in, when they mentioned that they either buy the curriculum here or piecemeal something there to get the curriculum together, I'm like, is that truly the best approach for our students? And then also here, I wanted to mention that this chapter also supports blueprint implementation, EML development, absenteeism, and professional learning for the general education and language staff. So with that, and here in my bar, here we go. I forgot to call out under contractual services, outdoor education, which I loved in 6th grade. It's about $0.7 million, and program assessments of $1 million. Everything is really going up this year as well, year over year, due to inflation or just other pressures on these contracts. The next item, one of my favorite slides, it is the CTE program at MCPS. There are 51 programs. When I went to MCPS decades ago, I participated and then was the pilot for the Academy of Finance, and it has changed my life and allowed me to change my family legacy and be, you know, financially independent. And so I'm very grateful for CTE programs in Montgomery County. Some of the discussions are revisiting the locations geographically of these programs and the availability. But I do know for minorities, a lot of us are really good with our hands. And though we may not go to college, that it's important that we are given a profession that we can be licensed and certified, because that's truly when you're able to make above minimum wage and be self-sufficient. And so I'm really pleased to see that we have 51 programs in MCPS to offer viable alternatives for our kids as they become adults in our community to have a comfortable living. And so with this, the next slide, then one of the things that the board members had mentioned, which I thought was spot on, and some of the members today mentioned, is next steps for these CTE programs. So when it comes to evaluation, right, MCPS led evaluations are needed of these programs by identifying upfront what success looks like, right? So you don't want other vendors or other people to determine what success looks like. Upfront, as we're implementing these programs, we need to say success of this spend will look like this, and then you evaluate it after a period of time that is reasonable. And so one of the board member asked that evaluations needed for one-time summary of historical records, right? And so first we need to catch up of here, as of today, how have we performed? And then ongoing evaluations needed for programs to include enrollment and outcomes. How many students are participating? What are the outcomes? And then also coupling that with the location of the programs using an equity lens is important to ensure each student that wants to participate, one, they're aware that the program is there, transportation is not a barrier, and they're able to perform and gain the benefit that will be for a lifetime. The current accountability measures that were mentioned by, I believe, the Peggy Pugh, I think she's an associate superintendent or of the academics department, is that annually there's reporting to the Maryland State for the Perkins funding that MCPS gets, and then also there's the Blueprint Pillar 3 implementation plan. And so there is some reporting that happens, but again, to everyone's point, no one knows how to find it, no one has seen it, and then therefore, is it really happening if, you know, taxpayers aren't aware of how to access it. And so with that, I will entertain questions, discussions, anything in the chat, Paula? You're on mute if you're talking, Paula.
Right, yeah, no, I'm not quite sure because there have been some things in the chat.
Sorry, CTE, that is the,
Okay.
oh, I wrote it down. Let me go back.
Oh, career and technical education.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, somebody has a link.
Yes.
So I think we've covered the other questions that were earlier, and I apologize for not keeping my eye on this. Because there was discussion about restorative justice, but I think we covered that. And then Joseph wrote, what are these offices called?
And I wrote that. That was under your chapter, Paula, it was the academics.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I think we're caught up.
Okay, so we will keep it rolling. Again, continue to raise your hand and put it in the chat, but this is great conversation. So next stop is the chapter that is nearest and dearest to my heart. As an autism mom, special education has been my reason for advocacy, my reason for being as involved as I am as a community member. So let's get into it. So special education, chapter 5, this is the central office piece. So special education is shown 2 times in the budget. One, I believe, is in chapter 1, which is special education at the schools, the local instructional in classroom. And then here in chapter 5, it's mainly central office and the support that happens there for special education. So you can see special education is a huge part of our budget. And so it truly is important for us to ensure that the funds are being spent in ways that we can track outcomes. And so the base budget here, again, for special education in the central office is $118 million out of the $3.3 billion. So that's about 3.6%. The call outs that I have is for salaries and wages of 58 million and other, again, I don't like this other, for 57 million. That we will talk about. And then the smaller numbers are contractual services of 2.7 million for speech pathologists, and then supplies and materials, very small. So going back to salaries and wages, this is one item that was shocking to me, that I do think that taxpayers or need to be aware of is, again, this entire budget, Chapter 5, is for central office, but out of the $58 million, only 48% is for infants and toddler staff who work with our most youngest learners, starting from age 0 through the time they're ready for school. And so my son went through infants and toddlers when he was 1.5 years and identified for qualifying. And that's when they're able to catch this children as early as possible, because early intervention, early detection, early evaluation is the best way to allow our special education students to have the highest performance level throughout their academic career. And so Infants and Toddlers is a very great program in coming to the parents' homes and providing that early intervention to help students be ready for school as they get older. And so that accounts for 48%, 27.8 million. But then that means 52% of this entire budget at central office is the overhead. $30 million is for central office staff. And so I'd really like for us to revisit those positions and are they truly needed, and make sure we define what those roles are to ensure that this ratio of hands-on instructional time with our students and overhead gets right-sized. Because right now I don't see how you can have more support staff in the background and less on the front lines. And then other call out here, $57.1 million, that is primarily for the non-public tuition, 55 million out of that for our students that essentially MCPS doesn't have the resources to provide adequate education for these students. And so they are non-public tuition is paid. Other items I wanted to call out maybe quickly in interest of time. If you're not familiar with special education, there are two major pieces of federal legislation that drive delivery of special education services. There's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004, for short is known as IDEA, and the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, ESSA, ESSA. And then coupling that with the board policy, Education of Students with Disabilities, that further affirms the commitment of the school system to ensure the provision of FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education, that students have a right to a public education with reasonable accommodations. And truly, that is the reason why my family has remained in Montgomery County, being a special ed mom, is that MCPS truly does prioritize our special education students, though I do believe that there are improvements that need to be made, but they have a good start as they compare to other LEAs in terms of really making special ed kids feel welcomed. I see your hand, Brenda. I will get to you in discussion. Thank you for that. So then the outcomes, right? We make all of this investment in our budget each year for our special ed kids. But unfortunately, our special education outcomes for our students, and this is as of June, so if there's something more recent, please forgive me. For special education students, you could see here, here's the legend. 49% or red means doesn't meet measures. Yellow and green and blue are really the colors we want to see. But unfortunately for math special education students, they're not up to meeting expectations. And so to an earlier point, we're making all of these investments, but the outcomes are not there. So what levers need to be adjusted so that we can improve these numbers? That's a focus that of the Special Populations Committee, one of the committees on the Board of Education that I'd really like to see. I know historically, as I've followed this group, some of the things that have been brought up is the level of over-disciplining of our special education students that have risen to the level of disruption, where I believe the state board have come down on MCPS and asked them for a remediation plan because our special education, our Black boy special education children are, I don't know if it's like it's some huge number multiplied than their peers in being over-disciplined. And that is a disruption because they're out of the classroom, not where they're supposed to be to learn. And then coupling that with, for for special education students, that ensuring they're in the least restrictive environment. I think that's another remediation that MCPS needs to make with the state board, where too many of our students are in the self-contained classrooms, where the state is asking for less students to be in these like learning centers or the self-contained, more with the gen education students. But then my thought is, if the state is saying they want MCPS to put more of the special ed kids with the gen ed kids, that is, yes, it's less restrictive, but if in a self-contained classroom where the kids are in like 10 students in a class, right, and they're performing at these levels, how are their performance going to improve when they're in bigger classrooms? Like, I just feel like it's backwards, right? The students are already in a smaller classroom and their levels at this. Like, what is happening? What is happening with our students that their performance are at this level? So I really do want to see more there. I don't want to take too much time, because definitely I'll get on my soapbox, but I am here to help and be part of the solution. So then the next item is, again, on the literacy side. Significant improvement is needed for our special education students to ensure that they have the foundation that they need. The saying is that kids learn to read from K to 3. And so they can read to learn from 4th to 12th grade. And so if a child can't read by 3rd grade, a lot of things negatively start happening, which you hear about the school to prison pipeline, or you hear about students start to disengage in that 4th and 5th grade. And then when they get to middle school, now they're behind, so they're frustrated. So that's linked to their behavioral challenges, where they're just like, let me do whatever it takes to get out of this classroom, because that'll stop me from feeling bad about myself because I can't read, right? And so I have seen some challenges like that personally, where this is super important that we remediate this, because our students' mental health, their social emotional learning, their academics, everything is hinging on the ability to read, because reading is foundational. So maybe with that, I'll turn over to any questions in the chat. Raise your hands for chapter 5.
Right, so Brenda has a question.
Yeah, so I know that with special ed, there's a lot of legal requirements when it
Yes.
comes to the paperwork. And I know that a lot of special ed teachers report feeling overwhelmed with the amount of paperwork that's required. So oftentimes they're not able to be in the classroom teaching, co-teaching, helping students one-on-one because of all of the legal requirements of the paperwork. So I'm wondering, although from what I've seen, I don't think that's true, but I'm wondering if the central office 58 million is related to the legal paperwork that's required. I mean, is there any way of knowing that?
There is. I think anecdotally, some of the things that I've heard, either at the board meetings or through families, is that I'm a firm believer that our teachers need to be freed up to teach. And one of the things with the staffing shortages each year, it's always in special education. And so MCPS has duly coded teachers in the school system that can teach special education. But I believe either, conversation is that they don't want to teach special education, even though they are qualified to, because of the paperwork, right?
It's because of the paperwork, because it's
Right.
overwhelming, and they're not able to work with the kids as they should. I mean,
Right.
a lot of the times is what happens is that you'll have the teacher up front teaching,
Right.
and then you have the special education teacher in the back
Yeah.
completing the paperwork instead of actually working with the students.
Some of the things I have heard, because my child recently went through this for the autism program, is that there are certain things that only the special education teacher can do because they are licensed. And so I think we need to look at those rules to say, do we really need a certified with the alphabet behind their name to fill out this form? Maybe it could be under their supervision and they finalize it after it's been drafted by someone else. Like, how can we ensure that we look at each item that is a barrier for other teachers wanting to be in special ed and see, are there changes that can be made that they don't have to carry this load on their own? Because ultimately our students don't have permanent teachers. And as we know, and as part of this chapter, the community that was solicited said our #1 request for special education is permanent teachers. Do not give us subs, do not give us, these rotation, because our students, like even with my son, he took 9 months before he trusted his teacher. So once you build that momentum, that gets into the ESY and other things, but special education needs they need foundational permanent teachers. And so we really need to revisit how we incentivize teachers to stay and
Esther,
want to be there.
I
this
have
is
one more
Gordy.
question.
Can I amplify on that? If you look at table 5, staffing increases, the largest increases for what are called para educators. And predominantly para educators are the folks that are in those special ed classrooms preparing paperwork. They are
Yes.
not certified teachers.
No,
And they're
but
paid
having worked,
significantly less money.
I want to say something. Having worked alongside special ed, para ed, they are phenomenal.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so, I mean, it's the support that they provide. They know
Yeah.
the students, they follow the students from class to class to class. So it's very different from a full-time certified special ed teacher
Right.
who is usually dedicated to just a subject. So
Right.
they may see that student, you know, maybe once, well, this is at the high school level. So
Right.
they may see that student like just that one period, whereas the para gets to be all over the building and see that student in multiple periods.
Right.
So that's the big plus. And I think that if it's gone up with the paras, that's why.
Right. But the paras are paid, to me, not enough. But that's
No.
no, right. Like, I just think my son loves them so much. And I'm like, just like my teachers, I'm like, please pay them. My kids love them, like, pay them. But you know, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out overnight, but definitely more can be done to get our paraeducators certified, to get them, you know, more money, to allow, you know,
So
them
once they
to
get certified, then they get dedicated to the paperwork. And so
right.
what
And
do you
it's like,
want?
right. But same thing with our high performing teachers, right? Like, what do we do with our high performing teachers? We take them out the classroom, we put them in central office. That doesn't make any
Yes, they
sense
become an
to me.
administrator. That's
Right,
right.
right. And so I do
Okay.
understand you're trying to replicate their success with other people, but it's like, no, until all of our schools are fully staffed, I don't want anybody in central office. Like,
Right.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Yes,
we're
please.
running, it's almost 8:15.
Sorry. Yes.
And Fitzgerald had a question which is relevant.
Yes.
We've been talking about, is there a pathway for all paraeducators to gain full-time status and NTPT to recruit additional staff for special ed teacher shortages?
I think the short answer is yes, because I do believe so, but we can always circle back with you. But I do believe there is a program and it's paid for. And one of the chapters you'll see there's tuition reimbursements for a bunch of things that MCPS is paying for, whether it's for college students or for teachers to up their certification. Okay, so thank you, Paula, for cracking the whip here. So let's move on to chapter 6, your chapter.
My chapter, hang on. Okay.
Strategic initiatives and technology.
Right, and this is a large chapter, and it's the Strategic Initiatives and Technology Division, and the Office of Strategic Initiatives, and it's made up of 7 departments. So I'm going to go through them. I'll go through them fairly quickly, but first, again, I want to call out the initial racial equity and social justice statement at the beginning of this chapter. OSI is the lead office on the Anti-Racist System Action Plan. So we know there's an action plan that you can look at. I think it's on the MCPS website. OSI has developed data monitoring dashboards. OSI uses data to monitor the impact of programs and initiatives. OSI develops and launches technology tools that are, quote, accelerators for equity, which kind of goes back to what I was asking you, Gordy, about what is accelerators. So once again, here is a chapter where there's a lot of references to data and dashboards and programs, and we need to be able to see these as parents, as residents, and taxpayers. So there are 7 departments here. The overall budget for the office, as you see, is over $52 million. And last year's 24 budget, or the current budget, was slightly less. It was, oh no, it was actually more, $52,892,000. So it's a projected decrease of over $500,000. And the overall staff breakdown for the entire office, 24 admin staff, 8 business/operations admin staff, 24 professional staff, and over 129 supporting services staff. And so you kind of see the same thing where the ratio is not like what you'd expect if you ever work in a business. So the staff dollar come up to over $22 million. And then there's additional staff. They're professional part-time for about $80,000. an unknown supporting services part-time for $500,000. There's something called stipends. And then there's a line item for summer employment, but this is left blank, and it looked like it's been blank or empty since 2023. And then we have contractual services where there is over $500,000 spent on consultants, and something called other contractual, which is over $23 million, but there's no line item or call out for what that is. And then we have supplies, $500,000 for other supplies, travel over $26,000, almost $1 million for a line item called other system-wide activity, but no details about what that $1 million is spent. And then for some reason, which I guess it's, $4 million for utilities. So just to go and break it out one by one, the first department is the Department of District-Wide Professional Learning. And this is to provide professional learning opportunities for all the employees. And then it mentions, quote, the implementation of a comprehensive professional learning plan. So once again, you have a reference to a specific plan, but where is the plan? Can residents and taxpayers see it? This department is growing. There was an increase of $1.2 million as opposed to the FY24 budget. The proposed staff are 3 admin, 1 professional staff member, and 2 what's called supporting services staff for over $800,000. So there you have it, travel $1,100. The next department is the Department of Equity Initiatives, purpose to, quote, advance racial equity, social justice, and cultural proficiency by interrupting systems of implicit and explicit bias, oppression, and inequities in our policies, practices, and procedures, unquote. And the budget for this department is over $1.2 million. There are 8 full-time staff members, 1 director, 3 instructional specialists, 2 equity training specialists, 1 parent community coordinator, and 1 admin secretary at level 3. And the total budget for staff is about $1 million, or slightly over $1 million. So there is $42,000 for other supplies and materials, $8,400 for this other system-wide activity, and $2,500 for travel. Next, the Department of Digital Innovation. The budget for this department is about $4 million. It includes 21 staff members, 3 admin, 1 business/operations admin, 11 professional staff, and 6 supporting services for a cost of about $3 million. There are also other salaries, which include stipends at $76,000. Then again, almost $1 million for, quote, other contractual consultant services. And again, kind of vague. We don't really know what that's for. Over $7,000 for travel, and over $7,000 for other supplies and materials. Next is the Department of Student and Data Systems, and staff in this department are charged with, quote, operational excellence by providing streamlined administrative processes, technical support. This is just sort of seems to be the basic IT requirements and program requirements for running such a large enterprise as MCPS. They manage data, they put out the transcripts, grades, reports, that kind of thing. They manage the My MCPS staff portal, the MCPS student data warehouse, and the student information system, SIS, projects, widgets, and analytics system. And for this department, it's about over $8 million. And then if you're following here, the federal ESSER money that we talked about early on, that grant money is gone, but the money required is now shifted to the permanent MCPS budget. And here the purpose is to develop and manage internal dashboards. And the school profile dashboards are going to replace Schools at a Glance. So according to the purpose for that was, this will increase transparency. So Gordy, you can take that however you want. So the department is divided into 2 first student systems, and then second development and information architecture and data systems. And there are 24 full-time staff members for almost $3 million. And there's something called other salaries for about $61,000. Contractual services are going to be about $5.5 million and over $36,000 worth of supplies, with travel being minimal at about $1,100. And then next is the Department of Infrastructure and Operations. And the reason for this department, the purpose is to manage the enterprise-wide technical systems, which is the data center, your email at MCPS, network connections, telephones, all the, IT programming backup stuff that you just take for granted, data center operations, technical support. And the budget for this is about $12.5 million. And this includes 70 people, 3 admin, 5 business operation admin, 62 support services staff members, with staff salary costs at over $7 million, which is an increase from last year of about $250,000. And then we have another $7 million for other salaries for part-time supporting services. So $250,000 for contractual services, $250,000 for supplies and material, and about $7,600 for travel. Next, the Department of Business Information Services, which is mainly managing the Enterprise Resource Planning Program, ERP, managing human capital, which is, HR type, but technical stuff, that managing the payroll, professional development, career management, financial management. And here the overall budget is almost $15 million, with 21.5 staff members, 3 admin staff, 1 business operations admin, 17.5 supporting services staff, at about $2.5 million. And then at almost $500,000 part-time supporting staff, $12 million for contractual services, $41,000 for supplies. Travel here again is minimal at less than $1,000. And the last department is the Department of Shared Accountability, which has as its major function applied research and evaluation provided by an applied research and evaluation team. So if you're looking for data, I think the people in this department may be able to help you. They do assessment and data management, managing central records. They provide testing, reporting, record keeping that is required by the local, county, state, and federal agencies. And it says here, quote, for the applied research and evaluation, they, quote, use scientific tools and techniques. But we don't really know what those scientific tools and techniques are. And it would be interesting if people want to dig in and really find out specifically what they are. They do analyses, for example, for all in the equity and achievement framework and the MCPS data dashboards. And the overall budget for this is also about $4 million, almost 30 staff members for a budget of over $3.5 million. And other contractual services here, the consultants, about $120,000. They're proposing over $20,000 for supplies. And here again, travel is minimal at about $2,600. So this is a very large office, but it seems like they kind of hold the keys to the kingdom in terms of data, reports, analysis, scientific analysis. So any
Awesome.
questions or anything?
Yeah, no, that's great. And definitely here we've listed out some of the things that were mentioned at the board budget work session for this department. And then the next slide, though not big dollars, it was a point of social media discussion with the request from a lot of community members to restore funding for Go Guardian, where MCPS has stated that they are not going to fund Go Guardian, which is a tool that allows teachers to monitor student Chromebook activity in the class. That's being eliminated for FY 2025. And so I think her name is Sharon who is a chief over this department, mentioned currently the utilization is 3,000 teachers for Go Guardian in the last month, or 6,000 used it this school year. And so the decision to eliminate Go Guardian is a result in part of working with MCC PTA Technology Group, Digital Balance Resolution. And so the solution that this department have offered to teachers is that they're going to go back to traditional ways of implementing classroom management strategies regarding the use of technology. And so I do hope that MCPS and BOE revisit this item, because it sounds like it was not in consultation to a lot of students teachers that said this was the first time they were hearing about it. It was a question that was raised by the SMOB at the board table. And it seems like for $230,000, giving teachers a technology tool to monitor technology is ideal, versus teachers maybe walking around the classroom or doing other things that will take away from them teaching students. Because ultimately, right, we want to ensure that students' competency or aptitude is being evaluated on assessments and summative and formatives, and not whether or not they can either use like a chat GPT or some other technology to mask the need for intervention or more assistance from the teachers. And so if we truly want to get to the heart of teaching our students, we need to ensure that teachers are armed with just as much tools to be able to really assess the needs of their students. So with that, we'll go to discussion.
Yeah, Laura, you had a question?
Yes, so actually it's a comment about the data dashboards. I just want to make sure everyone knows that you can submit input. They're taking feedback. So if you would like to see something there, data, please put it in the feedback, because eventually I would like to ask for what the feedback is eventually. So we can see what are the things people really want to see. So I just wanted to bring that up so we all put feedback in. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. And I see somebody said, did you calculate total travel expenses? No, I didn't, but it's something I'm always kind of interested in, because sometimes it seems outrageous. And I know I don't know how many years ago it was, the whole county, the county council decided to freeze travel, but MCPS was not freezing travel. So I always kind of look at that as a little red flag thing.
Are they like saying that they're going to conferences? Like, what is this travel? Where? What? Explain.
Yeah, I'm assuming that going to conferences, it could be just it's mileage going from school to school, there's a lot of travel, that sort of travel.
But $7,000 worth?
It was like a mileage reimbursement, potentially aggregate, it may add up, but yeah, no, that's something that we can always ask for some clarity on.
I think, yeah, that's what an MPIA is for. We've been successful looking for that. So, and then somebody else wanted to know if there's a slide, but
no, we didn't have the slide breakdown for that, but it's available in the budget. Right, that's where you got it from, Paula. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So with that, we will try to recover some ground and quickly move on to chapter 7. I see some Svetlana, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I added a chat as well. I'm just wondering if you have the total staff count for the previous slide.
The total staff count for chapter 6?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me see.
If not, I know definitely it's in the budget, the first table within chapter 6. We can get back to you on that. I don't know, Gordy, if you're able to put that in the chat, but it's out there. Okay, so we will move on to chapter 7, operations. Eric?
All right, well, I will be quick because this is fairly boring unless you're ticked off about the buses. In a nutshell, I looked at, unfortunately, my wonderful, beautiful slide, I had to get it in time to be included, but since there's not a lot of detail, I was more interested in looking at differences, like what have they decided to change and give you an idea what's going on versus trying to get into sort of figuring out what has been going on. And the operations budget is primarily Department of Transportation and Division of Food and Nutrition Services, right? They are like 70% of the whole budget or something. It's really huge. I mean, there's other things in there like labor relations and student welfare and compliance, which I guess is a little office that helps schools in the central office follow ADA and all these other things. But it's just dwarfed by transportation and food. Overall, you know, everyone in this office took a bit of a haircut. I mean, there was no real gain in all these small offices. You know, they would lose one person, gain another person. So the FTEs was a general sort of drop off for everything except for transportation and food. Transportation had an increase of well, they just hired more drivers. That's really what it comes down to. It was like 47 FTE, primarily drivers. What they have done is they've moved. They have a smaller line item for substitute bus drivers and that sort of things, and they've moved people into permanent bus driver employment. And you can see that also in the budget for food, which has also gone up. I mean, both of these things have gone up. They've added people in food, 16 FTE. It's primarily cafeteria workers. And like I said, the 47 FTE, which is like bus drivers. You know, on a good note, the transportation department got rid of their wellness coach so they could bring on an IT person, I think was the trade-off, but they've lost money with the ESSER as well. So they're reconfiguring it. Also, it looks like, and I did not know this, the whole food system there is an enterprise fund. So it's not like part of the tax system as all these other things are, and it looks like they had moved some folks who work for the Department of Materials Management, which is the warehouse and moving crap around, moved them over to nutrition to sort of change the line item. But basically, all that they've said is that they needed more bus drivers because there's an increase in enrollment. And there's increased demands for transportation for the Maryland blueprints and, you know, other sort of after school, before school things that they have to do. So that's basically in a nutshell. I mean, if you want to, the bus things can be interesting. I mean, obviously, they spent they had to add like $226,000 to support the cost of the diesel bus leases, and there was an additional like almost $600,000 for the increased cost of the electric bus leases for the 206 buses currently in the fleet. Just so that you know, by fiscal year 2025, they're projecting 1,437 buses in the fleet, which would be about 236 of those would be electric. Yeah, the only sort of positive that I can see out of all that, as much as people might want to debate what happened with the buses, there has been a decrease in the expenditure for diesel fuel and bus lubricants that they pointed out in the budget. So they've spent like $200,000 less on fuel and $62,000 less on oil, which doesn't seem that much. But on the other hand, I guess that's one of the benefits of having electric buses. I mean, ultimately, these electric buses are like an electric car. They're much less much less care and feeding of them outside of tires and brakes. So that's something. But that's really about it. There really wasn't anything in there that I could see that was just like, what the hell are they doing? It looked like that nobody sort of no one padded their offices. I mean, it looks like what was done was bus drivers and cafeteria workers was the heavy lifting on that. Yeah, the only thing that I'm curious about is there's like a, and I just noticed it not too long ago. There's like a $3 million line item. I think it was, it's a lot for summer employment in the Department of Transportation. And that kind of stumped me. I don't quite know what that would be. Considering it's kind of made a point of moving people off of substitute and these shorter term contracts into like permanent bus employment. I don't know what the summer employment program is, and there was no information on it in the actual budget document. But other than that, it seemed pretty straightforward, and it didn't seem to be, from a personnel point of view anyway, like people were doing things that didn't make sense. It looked like it concentrated more on the primary duties, like feeding kids and putting them on a bus. There wasn't like a lot of supervisors that were hired or something to make, to manage the bus systems. I think there was like one new supervisor or something like that. Wasn't much at all, considering the 47 bus drivers. So, and that's it. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, just kind of thinking off the top of my head for summer employment, I'm thinking that's the extended school year that they offer special education students students that a disruption in their learning would create, would set them back, that continuity of education, their guaranteed transportation, especially if it's part of the IUP. So probably that's the summer employment you see there. Of the 2 million consistently each year. And then just kind of going back to the prior slide, I know as I looked at chapter 7 and listening to the fiscal management committee, some of the things that were mentioned is that right now there is a transportation study that's being done to ensure that as we get to the end of the current contract with the current EV provider, that MCPS knows how to move forward. What are the other jurisdictions, school systems that have implemented EVs? What are they seeing? What are they looking for? How do we benchmark to them? So I think that transportation study that's supposed to come out this month would be important in understanding MCPS's goal right now is to be fully electric. Providing perspective here, right, wrong, or indifferent, I think when we think about meeting the needs of students and ensuring that they have access to their education through transportation, I do want MCPS to be cognizant of the fact that first and foremost, you are to get our children to school. And so whether it's a diesel bus or electric bus, it shouldn't be that your child wasn't picked up because the bus is charging. And that's some of the comments that were mentioned by the director of DOT at MCPS recently, was that in inclement weather, if there's a half day, for example, the buses, once they do the drop off at school, they need to charge for 3-4 hours. Well, if the half day doesn't allow for that, then the bus can't come back as quickly to do that pickup. And so it's important that we right size our fleet to keep it mixed so that inclement weather, blackouts, transportation for field trips, or the long distance out of county transportation for students going to their schools or for after school programs. I mean, there's so many things that they listed out that an EV bus may have range limitation, that it would become a barrier, which is not appropriate, because even right now with the technology, EV buses cost twice as much. From a taxpayer's perspective, they cost twice as much, and they require shorter routes that diesel buses that cost half the price can do without a problem. So we do want to just keep that in mind as we're prioritizing, safety, reliability, sustainability, environmental, all those things, cost, that we get to a better point long term.
So Eric, I had a question. For the electric buses, does that include the infrastructure, the charging stations, and all that has to be built out?
Correct. Yep.
It does include it?
Yeah, it's all being built out. But if you're building out in your jurisdiction of Montgomery County, but you're required to take sports activity teams to wherever they're going, intramural or to students in far ends of outside of Montgomery County, if there isn't a charging space out there, how are you going to come back? Right. And so definitely.
The charging infrastructure is built into the leases. I mean, that's one thing I can't really see in this one because it's probably sitting in somebody else's chapter, but you can't really see like utility charges. Like I'm sure you have to, someone's paying for some electricity to fill, charge up the buses. If you don't see that in this portion of the budget.
I'm so sorry. Give me one quick second.
So, and you don't see infrastructure.
I had utilities in my chapter and I can't remember.
Yeah, it's like 6 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't, like, how much of it is buses, I guess. You can't really sort of parse that out from where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting, but yeah. Because they do talk about the offset and not paying diesels, which okay, that's fine. But how much you paying in electricity? That's not here. I mean, this budget is really maddeningly vague.
Right.
I mean, you get to this whole sort of line item for contractual, like they say they'll have no consultants, let's say, but then like other contractual, it's like, oh, okay. A little bit more detail on that would be nice.
Right. Totally agree that as part of the transparency buzzwords that we use, like this is a case in point that we would like the budgets to be developed with more granular information that explains what exactly it's being used for.
Yeah, hell, even Montgomery, the county budget online is better. At least you can click on things and start going down into some of the expenditures.
Yes, that's one of our recommendations. A great point. We will get to that slide shortly of here are some of the solutions that taxpayers are looking for with the budget for improvements for maybe the next go round.
I want to make a small note, excuse me, especially I really like the presentation of this. And I just want to focus on this as it represents the fixed part, the fundamental. This is brick and cement of the structure. Like we cannot really compromise on the building renovations or bus renovations or anything like that. We can hire or fire people or can engage more contractors. So there is some flexibility in other budget chapters, but this is brick and mortar. If building crumbles, there is no school, even if you have full stuff there and 50 buses aligned. No, this is it. This is where kids go in, and it has to be safe and up to the latest standards.
Yes, and one thing to
Transportation
add,
included. Yeah, the least flexible part of the budget.
right, that's right. And the bus app is coming as well. That's being rolled out. And I think there's a $500,000 run rate each year for that software. So that'll be rolling out. Right now it's in a pilot of a handful of schools. And so with that, maybe we will turn it over to chapter 8 for Richard, facilities. Richard.
Thank you. This is the first time I've had any dealings with the school budget, so let me apologize in advance for not being as knowledgeable as the other presenters. But I can tell you something about the facilities budget. The total budget is the facilities portion of the total budget is 6.2%. It's already been mentioned that the overall budget, operational budget, is going up by about 5%. The facilities budget is going up by 8.5%. So it's outpacing the overall budget. My general impression of where the expenditures are going is pretty much trying to maintain current levels of service. And those seem to be the major drivers of the costs. In terms of FTEs, they propose to add 12.5 FTEs, not much in a workforce that's already about 1,900 FTEs. Where the cost comes is salary, new space, where that's adding 3.25 million. Because we now have an additional 110,000 square feet of space. ESSER has come up in previous discussions. That's an issue over here, more than 4 million. And then there's other. This has been mentioned before in the presentations. I see a lot of other, and it's awful hard to try to parse out what is in there. Some of it I can sort of infer from the narrative, but it's really kind of unclear. The other thing is contractual services. That's also been mentioned before. Percentage-wise, that's going up by 21%. And there's not a whole lot of explanation for that. In terms of some of these expenses, I've just mentioned over here, but this other over here, the main portion of that is on utilities. That's the 49 million. Gas, electric, water, which happens to be tucked into the budget for the Division of Sustainability and Compliance, which I seem a little strange. The heart of the operation is maintenance and operations. That's where most of the money goes. That's where most of the people are employed. In terms of new features being added, new programs, the one thing that's mentioned, which is adding to the expense over $1 million, is air quality monitoring. That's coming in at 1.4 million. That's a new one. And there's also an accelerator item, $250,000 for a cloud-based management information system. And we've already had a presentation that's talked about technology, and we have an office that does that. I don't know how this management information system ties in with the rest of the effort. And that's, I would say, in a nutshell, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. We'll move on to discussions. Any comments in the chat, Paula?
Nothing in the chat, but I'll just add to what Richard said. First, Richard, thanks for doing this. And then also just the redundancy that you called out. I think if you really, kind of went through it with a fine-tooth comb, there would be a lot of redundancies. The way the budget or the offices are all kind of divided up and siloed is something to look at. I mean, the board and the county council to look at as ways of saving money. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, we will move over to Chapter 9, Human Capital Management. I will present that on behalf of Stacy Sauter that had a scheduling conflict. And so you can see here for human capital, that is 0.73% of the total budget, $24.2 million. And that is primarily for salaries and wages of $17.7 million. Others, about $6 million. Contractual services are smaller, and supplies. I wanted to call out other $6 million, which is primarily related to the employee tuition reimbursement, the employee benefits, and university partnership tuition. So that gets back to one of the prior comments where we talked about our paraeducators and our teachers being able to increase their certifications to their programs within MCPS to help fund some of these things. And so maybe with that, we will move on to the next slide. So here on human capital, right, the one thing that I wanted to call out are the recent headlines in MCPS. So within the human capital management is the Department of Compliance and Investigation, and they have been in the news for at least two of the major not so, good reasons for MCPS. So in September of 2023, right, everyone knows about Joel Biederman promotion while under investigation for misconduct and the role that the Department of Compliance and Investigations played. And then earlier last year in April, MCPS security officer that was charged and he previously had a record that MCPS, when they were in front of the Education and Culture Committee at the County Council, mentioned in hindsight they probably should not have hired him. And so within those two kind of gaffes is really put the focus on the Department of Compliance and Investigations. And so right now in the budget, they are requesting an additional roles of 4, which of them are 2 investigator positions. So this is an excerpt from the superintendent's letter. And currently they have, I believe, 2 investigation specialists that does all the work for over 25,000 employees in MCPS, which is just really being set up to fail. And so I do understand the request for the added roles within this division, but then it really makes me question, is this more of a Band-Aid? How did you come up with, the need for only adding 4 additional FTEs to the department to remediate the recent headlines and scandals? And so the additional positions doesn't seem to be the solution, as it was not manpower that allowed for these 2 incidents to occur. And really for FY 2025, sorry, let me go back to my notes. For FY 2025, the operating budget, like I said, is requesting the 3 positions. There are currently 4 previous analysis done as well that the county OIG Inspector General mentioned. There were 4 prior analyses done on how to right-size this department, and those ultimately were ignored. And so really the request, and as I mentioned in the beginning, that the BOE members should recommend in modifications for this budget will be, how does this department HR plan to incorporate some of these all of the recommendations of the Inspector General to ensure that we begin the good work and hard work that is needed to remediate and prevent these things from ever happening in the future. And so one of the questions for the candidates that you'll probably hear on the campaign trail that I had note was, what steps should BOE members take moving forward to ensure there are checks and balance in place to be able to ask tougher questions and follow through. You can't always take the superintendent's word at face value. I think that were comments from Councilmember Albanos that really resonate with me. The prior superintendent's operating budget was issued in December. And so again, before the budget is finalized by the BOE and sent to the county council, there should be some incorporation of these things in there to this portion of the budget. And so we cannot throw away taxpayers' hard-earned money at this. Comprehensive work is needed to be done with HR process, the flaw in promoting people currently being investigated, change in culture and climate to address concern and retaliation, complaint process and not being sufficient. So there's a bunch of things that I think needs to be done before we can truly accept the request of $500,000 to just add a few more folks into the department. It needs to be looked at. Do we have the right competency, the right people in the group that can truly do the job? And the work needs to begin in FY 2025. So with that, we will go to discussions. Any comments in the chat?
No, just that Eric has to jump off. So thank you, Eric,
Yes.
for working on this project with us.
No problem. Take care, guys.
Thank you. And sorry we're going over, but definitely if you can stay, please do. We are almost done. There are 2 more
I
chapters.
have to jump at 9. I'm already a little bit late, so thanks.
Yeah, no
Right.
worries. Thank you so
All righty,
much.
bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Andy. So for chapter 10 on finance, again, this budget is $720 million, but I have adjusted out the $699 million for from the operating budget for employee benefits and self-insurance. That will be talked about separately on the next slide. So truly, finance is adjusted base budget of $21.5 million, which represents 0.65% of the budget. Of the $21 million, you can see the breakdown here for salaries, contractual supplies, and other equipment. The total FTE positions is 91.5 at the budgeted position salaries of 10 million. So it's about 44%. And then future supported projects. This one I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around because it's saying $11.3 million out of the total chapter 10 budget of the 21 million. So these future supported projects, the way MCPS was explaining it to the board was that this is basically like a pre-approval fund that MCPS is going to have in the budget so that every time grant money comes in, BOE doesn't have to go to county council and get them to appropriate the funds back to them, right? So it's supposed to expedite the process in which MCPS can do the good work that they want to do with the grant money prior to the grant money coming in. But then I'm like, how are we preventing there from being a duplication where as part of the base budget, we're building in $11.3 million to be, front load these grants. And then when the grants come in, like, how do you flow that back to taxpayers? Or how does that come back out of the budget? Or is it just adding on to that? So I wasn't clear on that. I did just want to highlight that I'm not all the way there and understanding how this future supported projects of $11 million is working out. Because on a high level, it just seems like maybe it's doubling up, that they're having it up front, and then when the funds actually come in, they have it available again, but I don't know. So other than that, so those are my comments there. Any questions in the chat or hands raised if you'd like to add on before we move on to the next item?
There's nothing in the chat, but I just had a comment about this unanticipated grant money, the future supported projects. That just seems like a way to short circuit the transparency. $11 million is a lot of money.
Right.
And I have looked at and testified about some of these grants to MCPS at the council. And it's important to know that, you know, what kind of grants MCPS is getting, how they're being spent, not just the transparency, but are they effective? If we're taking federal money, are we effectively using it for what it is really meant for? So that's something, I mean, I think I would testify and say that's not a great idea.
Right.
Just me.
Yeah, no, great. And then the piece that we just talked about that I carved out, employee benefits and self-insurance. So this is the big nugget that Gordy talked about in the beginning of his presentation, 21% or $699 million out of the $3.3 billion is for the employee benefits and self-insurance. And so we touched on, this is a state COMAR requirement that all benefits are to be budgeted in Chapter 10. And so the breakdown of the $34 million increase in the budget, again, is primarily to help fund the employee health benefit plan, which right now is significantly grossly underfunded, it sounds like. It didn't initially seem it's any fault of MCPS. I think they were historically too high, and then now they're too low, and then coupling that with inflation and increases in medication costs that they're just trying to right size, but ultimately it's going to cost the taxpayers a lot of money in the next 3 years. I think it would be $40 million a year for MCPS to get this fund to a healthy $25 to $35 million baseline. And so we will see, like we talked about, the increase in the state revenue of the $28 million, that they're going to try and put all of that to this fund to catch up above and beyond what they've already said they're going to do. Again, largely because it's just so underfunded that I think from an accounting perspective, the fund is negative, which is not good. Of course, MCPS can continue to pay their bills, but it's just, you know, a key indicator that they need to get a hold of and get out on. So that's the main call out that we just talked about. Again, the budget was $10 million. They got $38 million. So the excess, instead of giving it back to taxpayers, which is already too high, it sounds like they are prioritizing it back to the health plan because it's underfunded. So the next item, discussions, anything in the chat, Paula? You call that?
Yeah, there is something from Sharif. Does anyone know where lawsuit settlement costs come from within the budget? And I think that refers back to Beetleman and all the lawsuits that are being, you know, pushed against MCPS for so many issues.
Right. No, that's a great question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I wondered about that too. I didn't see any of that in the budget.
Right.
It's quite a lot of money.
Yes,
$10
and
million.
I do wonder about that too. That's one of the questions I have in to MCPS budget team. And so because I'm a CPA, so we have a lot of accountants on here. I know in, you know, non-governmental accounting, whenever you have settlements or you're in litigation, there is a requirement from an accounting standards perspective to book something if certain key indicators are there, if it's fixed, if it's determinable, you know, and so if it's more likely than not. And so I do believe there's an analysis that needs to be done with the ongoing litigations and things like that going on with MCPS, that they will have to book something, but I haven't been able to figure out where. If I had to guess, I think it would be in maybe the next chapter where we have the legal fees, but we shouldn't have to guess. We should be able to get answers from MCPS. And so that definitely is an item that I would also like to know, because we recently had the Damascus High School settlement. I think that was what, a couple $1 million. Where's that coming out from? Because as a taxpayer, I'm like, that's not what I'm paying y'all to do, right? I'm paying you to educate my children. So these settlements, we really need to not have them be so frequent, and that is the next chapter of legal fees. So that's a great lead into the final chapter. If you have any other comments, if not, I'll go there.
There are some comments. Laura points out the principal that was there is still employed by MCPS in HR, which is a place where, as we know in the past,
placeholder, right,
people go. So, and Kara, thank you so much for coming. She has to drop off.
Yes, thank you, Kara.
So,
thank you for your
thanks
contribution.
very much.
Yep. And I see Sharif raise your hand, or is that old?
Yep. Yes, Esther, it was that Damascus case, that settlement was nearly $10 million alone,
right,
just that case.
That's right. And then on top of that, the legal fees that we will get into in the current year. Exactly. So where are these settlements being hit? And are they budgeting for settlements like they are for legal fees, right? It's like, what are we really doing with the taxpayers' funds, and how is that, the best use of it? So great point. Anything
Thank
else
you.
before we go to chapter 11?
I think, and then just to point out, it's not just these types of cases, but the special needs families as well are constantly on ongoing lawsuits with MCPS.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then final chapter, and thank you all for hanging on with us. Great discussion. And so chapter 11 is administration and oversight. I will cover that quickly. So exactly like we talked about, $24.4 million or 0.74% of the budget is for administration and oversight. MCPS has one of the lowest administration and oversight budgets as compared to other large school systems in Maryland. The breakdown for the $24 million are salaries and wages of almost $20 million, contractual services of $3 million, supplies and other. So calling out the contractual services, like we talked about, legal service fees, including special education of about $0.8 million. I have a lot of concerns with this, and I will kind of get into it. So right now, and looking at the table here, I'll use my pointer. Historically, MCPS has budgeted about $700,000, $800,000 each year of legal fees. But when you look at the actual, it's come in 118% higher or 72% higher. And so my question is, why, from a budgeting standpoint, will they continue to estimate at such a number that has never materialized, right? Right? You under budgeting your legal fees, knowing what your current workload is and litigation and the status, and you can always get estimates from attorneys as to what that's going to cost. And even with this year in FY 2024, as of October, 4 months into the fiscal year, the legal reports are showing that MCPS has already spent $1.1 million. They've blown through their budget for this school year, and it's only 4 months into the school year. So as of October, we know to now, there's been many reports coming out, whether it's with Joel Biederman or it's the opt-out litigation that's pending with the federal court, that will cause this number to go up significantly. And even with our recent superintendent and how all those things wound up, we know this number is going to go up. And if we even just did a simple calculation of saying, well, for 4 months out of 12 months, they spent 1.1 million, then at that run rate, it may get as high as 3.3 million, which is just blows my mind in terms of taxpayer funds for just the legal fees, not the settlements, not the anything else. That is too much. It's growing too much. And I think we really need to focus on this number and also request more recent information. Why is it in January, we're only getting legal fees as of October? And so coupling that with the estimate in the budgets for legal fees, it needs to be more reasonable and closer to prior year historical trend, or based on actual current guidance from the attorneys that are doing the work as to how much more they think they're going to bill before this resolves itself. But this number just seems way too arbitrary and really not appropriate. And so we will continue to track the legal fees. It's a required report that MCPS has to put out. And so we will, hopefully we're wrong, but the number looks like it's going to blow away the budget. It has already blown away the budget. Svetlana, I see your hand.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to, draw a connection where analyzing these legal fees and the conclusions drawn, lessons learned, right? Like, are these legal fees originating because of the policies, because of the conduct, because of the lack of policies? What are these, legal fees streaming from? So, I think that it's important to, as part of the accountability, as these pile up and grow, to see if this is self-inflicted, so to say.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. The legal fees reports, what I like about it, I didn't put a picture in here, is it does give a summary letter to the board as to what it relates to by law firm, and whether it's special education or not special education. And so like with the Joel Biederman investigation, right, like that one would have been preventable if there were adequate oversight by the HR group of not promoting that person, right? Like, so if you're truly trying to get to the source, yeah, there's a lot of stops that, red flags that didn't operate effectively. And so maybe looking at the internal controls, right? So right now, MCPS is an internal audit department. They have oversight there. They have the county council, the education and culture committee. They have their annual third-party CPA firms that does the audit. They have the state level audits that happen with OLO. There are so many oversight bodies over MCPS that one of the things that MCTL is advocating for in the next few slides, you'll see that is a dedicated MCPS OIG office that reports to the Board of Education to really focus on some of these things to help mitigate the costs to taxpayers. But that's a good point as to getting to the source of stopping things before they happen.
And
And
one,
then-
one of the examples is the current, right? Like the current litigation about the policy,
Yes.
which is, you know, absolutely gonna, like, that's gonna be the cause of the fiscal year 2024
Budget.
overage for sure.
Right.
So I think there needs to be some accountability as far as, you know, the policies and who is in charge of putting these policies forward and who are they benefiting if, you know, at the end of the day, the fight is between the parents and the school, you know, with the taxpayers' money.
No, I agree.
Right, and then I'll just add, Shebra Evans wrote, the principal has not been paid since December by MCPS, but then Bridget Howe said, do you mean Casey Kraus or Joel Beidelman?
Joel Biden.
And, right, yeah, and then Shebra also wrote, unfortunately, anyone on administrative leave is housed in HR for the continuation of payment until investigations are resolved.
Correct.
Something we need to look at in terms of where to have employees allocated on our books,
Correct.
which is, I'm sure we all agree with that.
Yes.
So, and then Laura Stewart, to clarify, does Kraus still work for MCPS? She was the principal in Damascus.
Yes, I think that at the county
Okay.
council hearing, they said yes, they're still continue to be employed.
Okay, and then Ms. Evans said, she meant Joel Beidelman.
Yes,
So,
awesome.
thank
Okay.
you.
Awesome. So then next steps, we don't want to just, you know, have conversations like this and not arm MCPS with some information. So on here, we've listed out preliminary 7 things that we think can be improved with the MCPS operating budget. The first one is base budget. Currently, the budget is only presented on an incremental basis. And so we would like to also present the information from a strategic basis. Example is the costs and outcomes tied to outcomes. So we're able to, again, that accountability. Secondly, the budget content, it includes sections showing how much we need to include a section showing how much maintenance of effort is and how it's calculated in the trend analysis. As Gordy mentioned in his introduction, there's only a section in the superintendent's letter that alludes to how much increase it is year over year, but it never says how much it truly is. We have to try and create it ourselves, which isn't transparent. Thirdly, I think having like a budget ambassadors, that's a working term, but essentially a lot of the work that went into preparing something like this Budget Palooza, it was a lot of groundwork, a lot of taking the hard route, reinventing the wheel, that I think if MCPS wants to create more champions and advocates to the county council, that they should really dedicate some time or resources to community organizations like ours that want to be the hands and feet to the community, but we have to take the long route. We have open questions still. We're still, you know, unable to fully get there in terms of being the biggest raving fans for them getting their funding. So I think something a little more formal can be done to help us do the good work. And then table of contents to include a PDF page number. One of the things that Cara did was to try and create a table of contents, because trying to toggle between the chapters and appendices, it's like, how do I reference this page, right? And so there needs to be page references in a table of contents with links for user-friendly versions. And then even take another step further, I think someone mentioned that, maybe it was Eric, that MCPS's budget should mirror the county executive's budget that is online. It's a very dynamic tool that we're able to manipulate and drill down and truly get the detail that is there. And in MCPS's work papers, I'm sure it was built up as not just, you know, numbers, that we should have access to it. And so MCPS operating budget should mirror the county executive budget online as it's very user-friendly. Ask a budget question. I use this tool a lot starting in December. I had, you know, over 24 questions for MCPS, and I wasn't sure if each question was received by them because there wasn't any confirmation emails or acknowledgements. On the screen, it showed something, but I think if MCPS did a low-hanging fruit thing as confirming through email, because you have to submit your email that we've received your question, the average turnaround time is X amount of time, just to set expectations so you feel like you're in the queue and the answer is on its way. Second to last, create an online dashboard repository of Q&A from the community members. So right now for the budget website, there is a Q&A archives for FY24 of the board members and answers, but as of yesterday, it wasn't there for the current year FY 2025 budget. But I think also there should be community questions submitted through the Ask the Budget tool that we should all be able to see what other community members are asking of MCPS, again, to reduce and eliminate redundancies. And then lastly, the estimates methodology, like we just talked about, MCPS should revisit how it's estimating its key areas in the budget that has yield material variances, either it's over or under. And the example would be enrollments, state revenue, legal fees, instructional salaries, employee benefits. Sometimes it seems like the numbers are just not good estimates, and so it's not good budget making. So with that, our next steps, call to action, one of our last few slides before we turn it over to our awesome community members, is we would like advocates to provide public comments in April before the County Council. Please join MCTL and MCCF to remain engaged. Follow us on social media. Reach out to us if you need assistance or have questions about the process and timing for providing that public comment. It's really important we elevate our voices. We need to advocate for MCPS, dedicated OIG reporting to BOE, like we talked about, advocate for MCTL's recommendation position is no increase in our taxes to taxpayers in FY 2025. And then we want to emphasize the need for fiscal prudence and advocate for adherence to the spending affordability guidelines. And so I don't know if any questions in the chat, Paula, before we turn it over to our awesome candidates to spotlight them and give them a minute.
Sure. I just wanted to, I think this is from Shebra Evans. Great conversation. Thank you very much. Next year, consider having the superintendent to ask questions regarding the budget, not the board budget yet, and that Dr. Smith has come in the past to answer questions. And I think that probably was the Taxpayers League and not the Budget Palooza. But yes, that's something to think about. And then Sheldon Fishman, how much is invested in Board of Education increased, whoops. Oh, and then Shebra's answering it. Increased staff, et cetera, to do a better job of analysis and oversight. And then Shebra Evans said this year, 2 additional staff, an analyst and a comms director. So there you go. And I think, Svetlana, do you have a question or is your hand just raised? Yes, not.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
No question. Forgot
Okay.
to lower the hand. Thank you.
Awesome.
Great.
Okay. And so maybe with that, we will turn it over. We did want to give the candidate members 1 minute to just kind of introduce yourself after having this great conversation. We know you have put in, throw your hat in the ring and is here to represent our children. So just want to give you 1 quick minute to maybe do a quick introduction, state your district, your contact information, website, social media handles, and maybe just kind of highlight your top 3 priorities. We can start in order. This is a full comprehensive list of all the candidates that are currently running for Board of Education and their races. And we'll just start top to bottom if you are still here. I don't believe Lynn sent her regards. She was unable to join. Sharif, did you want to unmute and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. And, Esther, thank you very much for inviting me and the other candidates to listen to this organization talk about the budget. I was texting another candidate and we were saying how we got an education tonight. And it's good to, I could have taken this budget and looked at it and read the exact same thing. I'll draw back from my police. I used to be a police officer, I'm a retired Montgomery County police officer. And I was always amazed how you can have 4 witnesses observe the same exact accident and you would get 4 testimonies of a different account of what you just saw. So for me to come into this and hear your perspective, the other members of your organization shed some light on how they're viewing these numbers. It was eye-opening for me, and I intend, especially if we I get elected, to rely on you all as a resource to bring that voice to the Board of Education. I'm running as an at-large board member, and I live in Laytonsville, Maryland. I have 2 kids in Montgomery County Public Schools. They're 6 and 9, Hudson and Luna, my daughter and my son and my daughter. And actually, they go to your school, Laytonsville Elementary School. So, I enjoyed my time on the PTA. I'm a delegate for the MCC PTA for the school. And just seeing how things operate, I mean, I don't think a lot of people in the public really knows what goes into being involved in the school, the education process here in Montgomery County. You guys are one small part, but look how detailed you all are. But it is like an ocean. And that's what, every time I attend one of these meetings or I talk to some of the advocates out here, I realize, oh my gosh, once again, we're about this big in this big system. So the important thing is to listen to everybody, get everybody's input. I've always appreciated your advice, Esther, and always focus on the kids. That's why we're there. So
Awesome.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you, Sharif. Melissa Kim, I'm not sure you're here. Jonathan Long. Maybe he may have to drop off. Rita Montoya. Maybe she dropped off. Okay, and Fitz. He may have dropped off as well. Okay. From the District 2, Brenda, are you still with us? Okay, she may have dropped off. Ricky, are you still with us?
I'm here.
Oh, Brenda. Okay.
I
Sorry.
was just trying to unmute and all
Okay.
that. I stayed. Yeah, so my name is Brenda M. Diaz. I'm running for District 2. So I'm a former MCPS teacher. I've been teaching basically my whole life. I've run a farm and forest program right now for homeschooling families, and I'm really enjoying that. I have 3 girls. One graduated from Poolesville High School, and she's now at Montgomery College. My second girl is at Quince Orchard High School. She's a 10th grader there, and she plays softball. So, yeah. And then I have my 9-year-old who I homeschool. And so it's been my priorities. I'll just list that or state that. So, yeah, to rebuild the foundation of academic excellence within MCPS by focusing on reading, writing, and math. I really believe that we can pave a way to getting back to those core fundamentals so that we can improve test scores in the county and just improve overall performance. I think our children deserve it. I want to prioritize safety within our schools. It's difficult to concentrate on learning when you basically don't know what's going to happen next. There's a drug problem in the schools. There's lots of fights within the schools. And so I would like to bring the SROs back into the building. I remember when I taught at Gaithersburg High School, the relationship that the SROs built with our students, and it was fantastic. And even with the teachers, and everyone welcomed him. It was great. And so I'm not really sure why they got rid of the SROs, considering that the administrators were in support of that. So I would like to bring the SROs back. And then also what we did today or tonight, this critical analysis of resource allocation, like that needs to be something that the board focuses on intensively in the future. And so you guys have done a wonderful job tonight presenting the others, the various categories of others that are undefined. And so let's define that, right? Yes. What are these travel costs? Where are people going? You know, I want to know. Yeah. I mean, there's just a bunch of questions. A bunch of questions. So I love it all. Thank you so much for your education tonight.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for running. Yeah. Ricky, are you still with us?
Good evening. How are you? Can you see me?
Yes.
Thanks. I'm Rick Moy. I'm in District 2, like Brenda. I live in Rockville. I'm a father. I'm a veteran, and I'm a community advocate. I'm out here with the community, all the time doing stuff to improve. And I see something wrong. When I see something wrong, I like to see if I can fix it. That's my nature. I have 2 kids at Bell. They're in 5th grade and 3rd grade. When they first came here, one of the things that shocked me was my kids told me that they were repeating the lessons they learned the previous year when they were in Georgia. And I didn't particularly think that Georgia was with spectacular education, but even a backwater area, not backwater, sorry, a farming area was teaching our kids there at a higher pace and higher level than Montgomery County, which I thought was a premier school district. That's why I moved here. Yeah. My wife eventually became a teacher at Clarksburg High. She left after about a year at Clarksburg. There was a lot of frustration, and I helped her through it. A lot of kids didn't attend classes, and then at the very end, there's a lot of work that's piled on that they had to get through in order to graduate that class. So I wanted to see if I can help fix root cause problems instead of dealing with just symptoms.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Yeah, thank you so much, Ricky. Sorry about that. Rebecca Smandrasa, I don't believe she was able to join. Abby, are you there? Or Natalia? Okay. And so we'll move on to District 4. Shebra Evans, are you able to unmute? Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. So good to see everybody. This is Shebra Evans, and I was able to hop on after seeing a good bit of our hearing, listening to our parents talking about the MBA, the extended school year calendar, as well as the Leader in Me program. So great to be here. And so just real quickly, I am running for re-election in District 4. A parent of a graduate of MCPS and a current student MCPS. And while I have so many priorities, the 3 that I'll focus on this evening is one that I appreciate how much attention that Esther pays to our meetings. And so you spoke just correctly in stating that, our earliest learners need access to be able to level the playing field. We want to ensure that we have a thriving economy, and we do that by allowing our early learners very early on to be able to come in and access early care and education, as well as educational equity. That is very dear to me. I am a champion for equity, and I believe that when we equitably distribute and allocate our resources according to what each student needs, they can each reach their full potential. And then the recruitment and retention of a highly qualified, diverse staff is very, very important. And it will allow our students to see what they can be, and as well as that cultural piece that some of our students might be missing because they haven't had the experience of being around peers and adults that have had different experiences and that they can share with their students. So great to be here to share with you all that I'm running for re-election and what my priorities are, and just look forward to the continued conversation. And thank you for this time.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. And then Bethany, I'm not sure if you're able to join and unmute. And last but not least, Laura, are you still with us?
I'm still here to the bitter end.
There you go.
Good evening. My name is Laura Stewart. Thank you for allowing me to come here with the rest of you to learn about the budget chapter by chapter and to speak about my candidacy for the Board of Education in District 4. I've been a Silver Spring resident for 27 years, and my 2 children are recent graduates. I'm really just a mom who cares about kids. Growing up, I learned Tikkun Olam, which teaches that it is my responsibility to make the world a little better, make it a better place. I've been involved in state and county PTA leadership positions for over a decade, and I've spent 10 years building relationships with all kinds of people around the county. And I've served on multiple boards, and including 2 that had experienced a financial crisis directly before I joined. So I'm experienced in coming into situations that might have a little chaos around them. And that brings us to the school system I love, MCPS. 60 MCPS administrators have left over 2 years. and 22 principals have left or announced their retirement over this year. We've had multiple lawsuits, which we've learned about here. It cost us money. The Office of the Inspector General, the very office that I actually advocated for in 2019, reported multiple problems with complaints and Title IX compliance issues. So all this is a backdrop about the very real struggles happening in our schools every day. We're not really delivering basics of education to our kids, and we are woefully behind in 3rd grade reading proficiency, which we've learned here, and we also lag in math scores. So I know we've made a small step forward, which is great, but we really need a big leap forward. And we need to look at offering opportunities equitably at our secondary level. And as we talked about here today, at more opportunities for CTE, that really makes a difference. And just to close, the Board of Education needs to tackle these issues because it is the oversight body for MCPS. I decided to run to do that oversight and not just ask questions. I've advocated for open data for years so we can see those patterns and how the patterns can direct use of money so we can use our money more efficiently. And I will bring my advocacy for open data, accountability, and student opportunities to Board of Education. So, we're in this together. We'll see what happens. Thank you,
Laura. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining our budget palooza this year. I don't think we had any there. So with that, thank you for hanging in with us for this long duration of time, but we really appreciate you. Definitely reach out to us. And with that, I say good night. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Gordy and Esther.
Thanks,
Thank
Paula.
you.
Thanks, all.